Hello, children. Are you sitting comfortably? Well, if you are, then move about a bit and shuffle so that you're sitting uncomfortably. Because I'm going to tell you a very important story and you need to be alert. Right? Are you sitting uncomfortably? Right. Then I shall begin. Now, this is a story of unrequited love in the depths of a fairy wood. A nature story, really, about the great outdoors. It has to be an outdoor story because that's where nature is most of the time. In fact, in this place, in my house, if it wasn't for that potted plant over there and a couple of bulbs dying on the windowsill in the kitchen, there wouldn't be much nature at all. Most of it is outside. I think we're agreed on that. Anyway, this little dell was called Never Never Land. Now, nobody seemed to know why the creatures had called it Never Never Land in the first place, although the wise old owl probably did think he knew, and he said it was because the little ducklings in the water kept warm by a little down each week, and the parrots were on higher perches. Now, some of the birds and the beasts and the insects and whatever else hangs about in a glade, basically, were living out their lives very, very happily. And at twilight, you would hear them chirruping and croaking and whatever, their little messages to one another. For example, the trout would shout out, "Toodle pip," and the carp, which cheers but not inebriates, would cry, "Cheerio," and mollusks murmured, "Morning," and salmon chanted, "Evening." But all was not peace and beauty in that lovely glade. Oh, my goodness, no. As the poet wrote, but forgot to rhyme, nature in the raw is seldom mild. And several small furry and finny things were not at all happy. For instance, Beatrice the bunny was madly in love with Vincent the vole, and all day long they mooned about in the long grass, holding paws and sighing and gazing into each other's eyes, which was a complicated business, actually, as their eyes were on either side of their heads rather than in the front. So they had to keep, dashing round each other to gaze into the loved one's other eye, only to find the loved one was on the way back. Anyway, a mess. But worse than that, they had to do their courting in full view of all the other animals. And why was this? It was because the woods were full of hunters with guns who were on the search for game to make pâté out of them and to make paste and put it in pots and send it to Germany and places like that. As Vincent and Beatrice were prime targets, this was a dangerous time. And in the words, actually, of the wise old owl, a vole and his bunny are soon pâtéed. And there was Terence the tadpole, who was looking so forward when he grew up to becoming a butterfly that nobody had the nerve to tell him he was wrong. And there was that little water creature who lost all his money playing poker with a group of leopards. Well, one of them was a cheetah, actually. And he spent every evening singing to himself and falling in the river. He was Titus, a newt. However, the saddest of all the animals was an otter whose name was Starkers. Now, he wasn't always called Starkers, no. His original name was Tarker, but he molted. Now, say what you will. I maintain there is no more unhappy sight than a bald otter. Starkers looked absolutely dreadful. And, without that sleek mink coat, it didn't look right for him just to go around clad only in his pink skin. It looked odd. It's like, I don't know, coming across a policeman suddenly wearing a ballet skirt or meeting the Queen, she's wearing a T-shirt and jeans. Wrong. All the other animals were kindness itself to Starkers and remembered as best they could not to mention his awful condition should it upset him, and they were ever seeking to cheer him up. "Hey, Baldy," one would shout, or "Coming to the pub tonight?" Or "Care to come as my guest to the fancy dress dance? You can come as a skinned rabbit." Things like that. Helpful. But for all their efforts, Starkers sank deeper and deeper into gloom. He began to avoid the company of the other animals, even refusing to go with them into the forest on the annual orang outing. He would spend all day up at the river, blowing his cheeks out until his eyes would pop out of their head, trying to force his hair to grow. Now, Starkers had a friend. It was his cousin, actually, Geezer, a water otter. Geezer became so upset at his friend's unhappiness that he went to consult the wise old owl. He didn't decide to do this lightly, as aside of being wise, the old owl was absolutely a crashing bore, but something had to be done. So he went. "Why, wise old owl," he said, "is Starkers Starkers? There must be a reason his coat fell off. Did he grow too fast and burst through it? Could he have run under a lawnmower without noticing? Has he contracted otter rot?" Well, the wise old owl held up a wing. He said, "Silence!" And then he nearly bored the tail off Geezer by going on and on chuntering away about the need to keep the forest tidy and not to drop toffee papers around on the grass. There's too much larking about in the trees at night, and so on. The water hole should be left as you want it, and so on and so on. And then the owl said, "I'm surprised you haven't asked me yet about your friend Starkers. Haven't you ever wondered why he's bald?" "Yea," said a Geezer, "you stupid fowl, I have just been asking you this." "Interesting case," went on Owl. "Quite simple, really. He's lonely. He needs a mate. So all his hair has fallen out. There is just one thing he needs to do, and his hair will grow back again healthy." "Just one thing he needs to do?" said Geezer. "Just one thing," said Owl. "To wit, to woo." He was right too. And here's where our story takes a happy turn, just before it has a sad one. A few days after Geezer had seen the owl, Starkers fell in love. Yes. She was not only to his eyes an otter of beauty, she was also as bald as he was, and entranced by her quiet, nay, silent charms, he spent all day, every day, alone with her, up at his remote little creek of the river. And the more he wooed her, the more his hair grew back. And this is the happy bit, you see. His coat was once again as sleek and glossy as it ever was. And now the sad bit. Misty-eyed with love, poor Starkers had not seen things all too clearly. What he took to be a beautiful, bald lady otter, drifting downstream into his arms, was not an otter at all. It was not even a live animal. A few days previously, a band of hunters had made camp up the river, and in their proceedings and feastings and carousing, they had been using a gourd and for the wine or the mead, and they just cast it into the river when they'd finished. Vaguely animal-shaped and completely bald, it had drifted downstream. The whole tragic occurrence was summed up in the following morning's newspaper headline, "Wine gourd torn deceives an otter." I thank you.